This is In-Depth Radio, News Talk 1010.
Coming at you on the count of one.
It's In-Depth Radio in Toronto, News Talk 1010. Pay for transit. There's been all sorts of ideas in this city. Would you like a municipal sales tax? Perhaps a congestion fee? HOT lanes, that's high occupancy toll roads. That would be perhaps keeping the HOV lanes that are now bottlenecking the traffic during the Pan Am Games and tolling those in order to pay for better transit. Is the way to pay for better transit to do it with making people who drive pay more to drive? That means more at the pumps, higher gas prices. In 2012, taxes in Canada represented an average of 38.3 cents per litre. That's about 31% of what you're paying at the pumps. But should we pay more? I know a lot of people talked about this idea today, and we'll talk to the man behind a new report in a second, but Jerry Agar wasn't too happy about it on his show, 9 to noon.
So more for gasoline, more to drive on the highway, more out of the pockets of people who drive cars. And by the way, jacking the price of gasoline jacks the price of everything. So who's going to be hurt first? The people the Liberals always say they stand up for. Low-income people, poor people. But I told you something was going to happen with these HOV lanes. They put them in as a temporary lane, and now they're looking at making them high-occupancy toll lanes. First they screw you, and then they make it official.
It's Jerry. And Mike Bullard actually was not too kind to our guest that we're about to speak to.
You know, normally the price of gas makes me mad. This guy also says that the Pan Am HOV lanes should stay after the Pan Am Games, and they should be HOT lanes. No wonder Trent stands for Try Real Education next time.
So that's a shot at the gentleman who would, I guess he's very kind to join us, despite the way we might have started off this segment. From Trent University, Harry Kitchen is joining us right now, Professor Emeritus for the Residential and Civil Construction Alliance of Ontario. The idea to raise the taxes that we're paying provincially on gas anyway from 14.7 cents to 23 cents. And Professor Kitchen, thank you very much for your time.
Okay, thank you.
So, maybe not the friendliest way to start this, but tell us why you're recommending that we spend more at the pump to pay for better transit.
Well, I'll start by reacting to a couple of comments. I mean, I was absolutely amazed at the lack of economic literacy in some of those introductions. Maybe they should have gone to Trent. They might have been a little bit better off. Anyway, we get that out of the way. And the reason for doing it, look, province is up against a wall. They've either got to cut expenditures, they got to raise revenues. They're never going to balance the budget by 2017 unless they do something. And it's my view that they're going to be forced into some kind of tax increase. So the question that comes up then is which tax or which taxes are appropriate. And my argument's always been that it's better to charge the people who use the service for the service they use, rather than charge everybody and use that money to benefit a few. So it's a pretty simple argument. It's based on those who use or those who should pay.
But doesn't that mean, and apologies for cutting you off, but wouldn't that mean that people who take transit should pay more for transit if it's transit they want to take?
No, it doesn't mean that in the case of there's a pretty I started writing about this back in 2008 and did a report. Did another report on it in 2013, and then another one that's just come out. Now the previous two were much more detail. If you take a look at transit in the Toronto area, the fare box revenues cover a higher percentage of operating costs than in any other large metropolitan area in North America. So transit fares in Toronto are already high. Now, why should we use tolls or fuel taxes to subsidize transit, I think is the next question. And the reason for this, the argument for it, it's just simply a simple second-best argument that road users currently are not paying the full cost of the road they use. They're not paying all the operating costs. They're certainly not paying the cost of congestion they create nor the cost of environmental problems they create. So there's an argument for saying, why force transit users to pay full cost when we don't force drivers to pay full cost? So the way you handle this is you say, okay, we'll charge drivers more and use some of the revenue to subsidize public transit. That's a pretty well accepted theorem and pretty well accepted practice in a lot of large areas.
Well, let's talk
there is
about
an argument for saying you should increase road pricing and charges on users.
So let's talk about this. I mean, clearly you've done the research and you've compared what other jurisdictions are doing in terms of paying for transit. I think Los Angeles used a sales tax. Parking levies are used in other areas. London uses a congestion tax. You're talking about road tolls and raising the price of gas. What works best? Are you suggesting that raising the price of gas is the most effective way to do it?
On a temporary basis, because it'll take a while to introduce some of the other charges. Like, you're not just going to introduce road pricing overnight. There's a certain technology that's got to be set up. I mean, it's available. The technology is available. But there has to be an infrastructure put in place, a technology set up. The easiest way to do it in the short run is to simply say, okay, we're going to raise gas taxes. And the rate I chose, I mean, you might say, well, why did you choose to go to 23 cents now? Well, there have been tons of studies done in the Toronto area, some by non-government organizations, some by the government, some by independent researchers. When it comes to financing transfer, almost all of them, if you go back and check the survey, all of them recommend fuel taxes as one option. So this one is no different in that sense. But this one says, and some of them say, okay, what would you get from a 3 cent per liter? What would you get from a 5 cent per liter? What would you get from a 10 cent per liter? I mean, why choose 1, 3, or 10? Nobody knows. It was just a number. So I said, all right, let's go back. The current provincial gas tax was set at 14.7 cents per liter in 1992. It's never changed since then. So I thought, well, what if it had been indexed to increase by the rate of inflation over that period? And if it had, it would now be at 23 cents, which essentially says that we're not generating as much revenue in real terms, ignoring the inflationary increase, as we were in 1992. So I chose 23 cents because that's what it would have been if we had indexed the gas tax at the rate of inflation.
And that would raise, by the way, $14 billion over seven years if you raise that in 14.
About $2 billion a year. Well, look, estimates are estimates. You have to base them on the best available evidence that you had. And so I just used, there are studies of it in the U.S., been done in other countries, that say, what happens to drivers, what happens to vehicle usage if you raise the gas tax? If you raise the gas tax, everywhere it shows that driving drops.
All right, I got to take a break, and I want to come back and ask you why people want better transit but don't seem to want to pay for it. That in a second with Professor Emeritus from Trent University, Harry Kitchen, who has the idea to pay for transit by raising prices that you pay at the pump. 15 minutes after 3 o'clock, News Talk 1010 Time Saver Traffic. I want to get an update on what's happening in the investigation into those two people being shot and killed at the Mocha Cafe in Vaughan. 2 others shot and are thankfully still alive. And what happened with that alleged dog attack that killed a man in Hamilton? We'll talk to our Dave Bradley before the bottom of the hour. Right now, we're happy to be joined by Professor Emeritus at Trent University. Harry Kitchen is the man who is behind a report, Residential and Civil Construction Alliance of Ontario. They've got a recommendation to raise gas prices by 8 cents to contribute $14 billion over 7 years. Now, you've compared best practices in a lot of different jurisdictions. I'm guessing Toronto isn't any different than any other jurisdiction that went down this road to control congestion and also to pay for transit. So why do people want better transit but don't want to pay for it?
I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I can't answer that. I guess you'd have to ask the people who don't want to pay for it why. I mean, I guess I don't know. What do people want? Maybe they just don't want to pay for things if they think they can get somebody else to pay for them.
Is it proven that when you get people that when people have to pay more for gas that they get out of their car?
Well, what it does, what the evidence shows, is the gas tax in the studies that have been done where they estimated the impact of increasing gas taxes. What essentially they've found is that drivers do respond. Now, they respond to different extents. So the empirical studies that have been done, and they're done at various places and on different cohorts, have found that if you raise, I'll just give you an example to try and illustrate it. If you raise the gas tax by 10%, vehicle usage will fall by somewhere between 6.7% and 12.3%. So there is a reduction. So when I did the estimates, I said, okay, it's somewhere in the middle of that. We'll assume it would be the case. And that's how the estimates were derived. But
all right.
But they did take into consideration that, in fact, people will respond to higher prices.
Okay. Thank you very much, Professor. It's not a popular thing to say to people who listen to talk radio who are predominantly in their car right now, but, you know, if you want transit, then you're going to have to pay for it. And even if you're going to stay in your car, it means you might get home a little earlier because there's not the congestion that we have right now. Professor, thanks for your time.
Okay, thank you.
Harry Kitchen is Professor Emeritus at Trent University and the man behind this report that says raise gas prices. You want to build transit. Trevor, you're on News Talk 1010, and you say stop gouging people.
Well, that's right, Jim. As a proud member of the 1%, I'm sick and tired of the politically expedient, let's go after the goose that lays the golden egg. There is a simple solution to all of this. It's attack long-term expenditures. The reason they have no capital budget is because they are spending, and we are slaves to this organization in this province. They are spending money on defined benefit pension plans for civil service, unionized civil servants. Remember, FDR, who was no supply-sider, warned against the power of federal civil service unions. We are living hostage to these people. The last provincial election was a perfect example of that. It's time for Atlas to shrug.
Well, if the school boards blink, it's $3.2 billion more to teachers, and I don't begrudge them their current wage or benefits, but I think they have to wake up into the real world. Finally, Alex, what do you say to Harry Kitchen and people who say, hey, you got to pay for transit some way?
Well, I think he's very short-sighted and very narrow-minded because he didn't say anything about any other revenue streams from the government. He was just talking about gas tax. I mean, I pay over $5,000 where I live up in Orangeville for property tax. And out of that, what do I get? I get snow plowing, and I get garbage service, and I get police and fire service. That's it. The rest of it goes to keeping up the roads, So when he said that drivers aren't paying for their share of the roads, that's hogwash. Because there are people that don't even drive that own properties, and they're paying for their share of the road that they don't use either. So it's very narrow-minded in the way that he's saying that, you know, drivers aren't paying for this. That's crap.
I do think it's entirely unfair. I agree with you that you go after drivers who don't want to use transit to pay for people who want to use transit.